Hi everyone, it's Neve here for the ScrapFX YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing a travel themed layout, which is a double 12 by 12 layout, focusing on my time in Gallipoli. So for this I really struggled finding some background papers that I wanted to use. So I decided to make my own. So I started off with two soft green colours of cardboard just as my base, and went through my collage stash to find lots of different vintage papers and book texts and postcards, anything that I could find that sort of would put me back in that World War I era. Particularly liked those really aged pages, which are actually German, so that kind of worked in well with the First World War theme, some maps and all sorts. I'm using matte gel medium to glue these all down. I'm being quite generous as I go, sort of glue it all down, and you'll notice I'm gluing between the pages, so I've got this sort of flow between the two pages. Over on the left hand corner I just glued down a piece of book text that I had, or newspaper text that talks about a Second World War, but you know, air raids and so on, some handwritten letters, a postcard. I did put down some vintage photos as well, which I really liked, but I actually ended up switching these pages over and taking off the image of the woman and the baby because it was just too big and you couldn't see it in the end. Now my idea was that I was going to use the transparency that you saw me put down, but I just couldn't work out how to fit it into my page, and again it sort of got lost behind all the photos. You also notice the silhouettes of the poppies, which I do end up using, so I knew I wanted to use those on the page as a bit of a frame in the final piece. Because I wanted to make the colour a little bit more consistent across all of it, I got out my tea stain distress ink and my walnut ink distress ink just to age up the pages a little bit more. Excuse me. Particularly sort of that map that was a little bit too, it stood out a little bit too much. And just make sure everything blended in. Now, if I had been thinking and not wanting to finish this all in one night, I would have actually taken this to my local photocopy shop and colour copied a few copies of this, because I actually really liked how these pages turned out. And I would really suggest to you, if you can't find scrapbook paper that you want or like or is appropriate for what you needed to do, make your own. It's really, you know, it's really easy to do. So these are the photos that I'm using. They are photos from 2003 that I've had sitting in an album, and they're just perfect for this. And they're all from my sister and I visited Gallipoli for Anzac Day in 2003, which is a hugely special experience. So in the days of old panoramic photographs, I had a few panoramic photographs sitting around and some other ones. Now I have to admit this is really strange process for me, because most of the time when I scrapbook these days I'm actually scrapbooking with inkjet printed photos, not proper developed photos. And it took me a little while to, one, cut them down to the right size, and two, I was really struggling with the glare of them, because again, when I have had photos printed, I tend to get them printed matte, so I don't have the glare. But these are the photos I had, and these are the ones I want to put in. And it was really funny because I've had these albums sitting around obviously since 2003, and I've really, while it was such a special experience, I've never really gone back and actually looked at those photos. They've just been sitting in the albums. So it was nice to actually break into them and to do something with them, because I will actually look at this page now. It's in my scrapbook album. So it was a great process, and it was a real reminder about why we actually scrapbook. We scrapbook the memories, and just by doing this it made me think a lot about the day, the time that we had, and my trip with my sister and so on. So I'm sort of playing around with the placement of how this is all going to work. The paper that you see in the background of my photos, I've put all my photos through the Xyron machine, which turns them basically into a sticker, which I find a lot easier than having to fiddle around with double-sided tape and so on to get the right shape. So if I can just put them through, and particularly for layouts like this where they sort of all have to sit together, it's just easier when you can just stick them down next to each other and not have the gaps. The photos you can see me slicing through, I wasn't too perturbed about doing that, because while it's sort of they're more about the atmosphere of the people who I'm cutting over and so on aren't important. They were just extra people who were there. So yeah, I didn't mind sort of slicing through the middle of them. So this is sort of how the layout's going to go. I decided I wanted to bring in some of that sort of eucalyptus dusty green colour. So I am using my Versamite pad and inking up my chipboard, and I'm going to put 2 or 3 coats of this sort of dusty green colour over the top. I had the dusty green of the cardboard in the background that I obviously collaged over the top of, so I wanted to bring some of that colour back in again. One of the things that I found, not that I struggled with, but on this page, because all my photos had different colours in them, you had the bright blues and the reds from the flags and the clothes that people were wearing, and then you've got the sort of browns of the landscape and that dusty green colour. It was really hard to tie it all together, and I was finding that a little bit difficult. I do love the fonts of these 2 chipboard shapes from ScrapFX, so they worked really, really well. So it was nice to have something too that's so specific to that area, particularly for Australians who may have been there, or obviously Turkish people who've been there. It's a very important part of our history, so it's good to be able to remember that and scrapbook with that. So once I'm happy with my layers of my chipboard, then I'm going to sort of do all the final touches to my page. You'll notice as I'm going along, I'm just checking out where it's going and how I want everything to sit. Now I look at that page, I wish I'd stopped there really. But I felt it needed a border somehow, because it just looked really, really separate. And I played around with lots of different versions of this off screen. I was going to emboss some brown, but I actually found this copper tape in my stash, which has actually started to tarnish, which I thought would be a nice colour scheme, because you've got that coppery of the background and it's going to get sort of this sort of tarnished rusty green effect over the top, which will tie in with the chipboard words that I used. So I decided to use that. Also gives a little bit of a shimmer to the page too, which I don't mind. The great thing about this tape is it's self-adhesive, so you can glue it down. It is actually proper copper tape. I think it's originally used, before it came into the scrapbooking world, for soldering. So you may be able to find it much cheaper somewhere else. I know I've had this roll in my stash for a long time, so which is why it's more tarnished than when I first bought it. I'm just using some scissors to snip it off. You can tear it, but just because I wanted to have those edges sort of all matched up, I actually used my scissors for a change. So once I've got it all glued down and trimmed up, then I'm going to glue on my chipboard shapes. Again, for this I'm using the Gina K Connect glue. I really like it because it's got that really fine nib, and it's really, really quick drying, and it's really tacky, and everything I've glued down with it, no matter how fine it is, has stayed put. So for me personally, particularly with chipboard, I found it fantastic. Also for gluing down really fine stuff like this silhouette, again from ScrapFX, it works beautifully. So, and it dries clear, so while you can see little white spots on it, and my photo where I put it in the wrong spot, it dries clear so you don't see it, which works particularly well on this one because I put the glue on the wrong side. So I'm busy gluing it up and I go to put it down and suddenly realise, oops, you've done it the wrong way. So I put it back down again and get a wet wipe and rub it off. You can see a little bit of the marking in the background, but it actually all dries clear in the end and it comes up really well. So if you do make an oops, wet wipes are really, really handy. Or, you know, just make sure you know which side you're gluing down to begin with. Would probably be much better. So once I've finished, I glue that down again, sort of get my placement and stick it down. So that's my final page. This is a close-up of the page, so you can see the tape and the embossing of the chipboard. This is the first side. Once I'd finished, I decided down the bottom needed something, so I actually used the small, I think it's called chisel alphabet, to write out the words lest we forget, because again, sort of tying it all together. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye for now.